Hi, I'm Gretchen Rubin, and I am here to tell you about the 4 Tendencies framework. Each of us falls into one of 4 distinct personality profiles, and knowing your tendency can reveal how to make your life better and how to make other people's lives better too. I had my first insight into this framework during a very inconspicuous moment of my life. I was having lunch with a friend and we were talking about her happiness, and she said to me, "I know I would be happier if I exercised, and here's the weird thing. When I was in high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice, so why can't I go running now?" And I thought, well, why? She's the same person, same behavior. At one time it was effortless, now she can't do it. And I began to see this pattern not just with her, but with other people. And once I started looking for patterns, I found many patterns. For instance, when I talked to people about happiness resolutions they might make, a large number of people told me, "I can always make time for other people, but I can't make time for myself." Another group said, "I'll make a resolution whenever it makes sense, but I wouldn't do anything arbitrary, like make a New Year's resolution because January 1st is an arbitrary date." Yet another group said, "I don't like to bind myself by making resolutions. I do what I want whenever I feel like doing it." I sensed some large pattern, but for a long time, I just couldn't sort it out. Then one day, I realized the key question is, how do you respond to expectations? I realized that we all face outer expectations and inner expectations. Outer expectations like a work deadline or a request from a friend, and inner expectations like our own desire to keep a New Year's resolution, our own desire to get back into practicing guitar. And the way that you respond to expectations will determine whether you're an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. Upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations alike. They meet the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what's expected of them by others, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They hate anything arbitrary, irrational, or unjustified. Their first question is, "Why would I listen to you?" So in a sense, questioners make everything into an inner expectation, because if an expectation meets their standard, they will meet that expectation. If it fails their standard, they'll resist. Next, obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And this explains the mystery of my friend on the track team, because when she had a team and a coach waiting for her, she had no trouble going running. But when she was just trying to go running on her own, she struggled. Then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time, and if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. Typically, they don't even like to tell themselves what to do. So what are some big points about the 4 tendencies? First, the 4 tendencies are not evenly distributed. The biggest tendency for both men and women alike is obliger. It's a big tendency. You either are an obliger or you have many obligers in your life. Right behind them, questioners, also a very large group of people. The smallest tendency is rebel. It's a conspicuous tendency, but it's a small tendency. Not very many people are rebels, and my tendency, the upholder tendency, is only slightly larger. And I decided, based on the traffic light system, to assign colors to each of the 4 tendencies. So green is for obligers, because green stands for go, and obligers are the ones who are most likely to say, yes, let's go ahead. And also they're the green of nature. Obligers are ubiquitous, they're all around us. Next, yellow for questioners, because questioners are the ones who say, wait, why? Wait, what? They're the ones who want to pause before they decide to go ahead. And then rebel is red. They say, stop, I'm not going to, you're not the boss of me. Well, there's no color left for upholders, but I assigned upholders blue because that seems like a good color for upholders. It's important to remember that your tendency is just one aspect of your character. We could take 50 obligers and line them up, and they would look very different from each other, depending on how ambitious they were, how intellectual they are, how considerate they were, how adventurous they were, how neurotic they were, whether they were extroverted or introverted. They would all look very different from each other, except that to this one aspect of their character would be the same, how they respond to expectations. Your tendency is a pervasive, hardwired aspect of your personality. You're born with it. You're the same at 20 years old as you are at 60 years old. You're the same at home and at work. That said, while people do belong to a single core tendency, it's true that people often tip in the direction of the tendency that overlaps with their own. If you look at a graph of the 4 tendencies, you see how each tendency overlaps with 2 other tendencies. For instance, obliger overlaps with upholder. They both meet outer expectations, and with rebel. They both resist inner expectations. That makes a very big difference in how your tendency shows up in your personality. People often ask whether they can change their tendency. Well, it's very hard to change an inborn aspect of your nature, if it's even possible, but it's very possible to change the circumstances and situations around you that are gonna allow you to thrive. And so the thing to do is to figure out how to harness the strengths of your tendency and how to offset the weaknesses and limitations of your tendency so that you can build the life you want. So what might this look like for each of the 4 tendencies? Let's say you're an upholder. Upholders often experience the limitation of tightening. This is when the rules start out at a certain place, and for upholders, the rules get tighter. This sometimes can be good, but sometimes it can become choking and constraining for upholders and the people around upholders when they start getting trapped by rules that keep getting tighter and tighter. So upholders want to become very aware of this pattern. How about questioners? Now, questioners can sometimes drain and overwhelm other people with their persistent questioning. They can sometimes seem stubborn or obstructionist or insubordinate or disrespectful, or like they're not being a team player because they keep asking question after question. Questioners need to learn how to ask the questions that they need answered in a way that doesn't make other people feel defensive or drained. Questioners can also face analysis paralysis. This is when questioners can't move forward because they want perfect information. But the fact is, in this world, a lot of times we have to act without having perfect information. And so questioners can take advantage of things like imposing deadlines. Well, I know I need to make a decision by Friday, or else I'm going to have to pay a penalty. Or using limits. Well, it's inefficient for me to interview 15 candidates for this position, so I'm just going to interview 5. Or using trusted advisors. We need to pick a new software for this project, but we know that this other team that we really respect has used this new software, and their experience can guide us. Then obligers. Obligers get frustrated with themselves because they meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet their own inner expectations. So, the answer, the solution, the key to meeting inner expectations, if you are an obliger or if you are around an obliger, is outer accountability. This is the essential thing to realize. If you are an obliger who is frustrated because you're not meeting an inner expectation, build systems of outer accountability around that behavior. Once you realize that this is what you need, there are hundreds of ways that you can build in accountability. You can have an accountability partner. You can form an accountability group. You can work with a trainer or a coach. You can take a class where they're going to charge you if you don't show up. You can think of your duty to be a role model for someone else. There's a lot of ways to build in accountability once you know that that's what you need. Now, obligers also experience the very common pattern of obliger rebellion. This is when obligers will meet expectations, and then suddenly they snap and they say, you know what? This I will not do. And sometimes it can be small and a little bit silly, like someone refusing to stop by the grocery store to pick up something on their way home from work. And sometimes it can be huge and destructive, like someone blowing up a long-term relationship or walking out the door of a job, quitting without warning. And so everybody needs to be very aware of obliger rebellion in order to offset it. So when does obliger rebellion strike? It happens when obligers feel like they're being exploited or neglected or taken advantage of or not being heard. And the fact is, obligers are often taken advantage of by other people because they're always so willing to step in, to volunteer, and to meet outer expectations. So obligers and the people around obligers need to make sure that work is equitably distributed, that obligers aren't being taken advantage of, that they're taking needed breaks, so they don't fall into that place of deep resentment and burnout that can trigger obliger rebellion. And finally, rebels. Well, rebels can do anything they want to do. They can do anything they choose to do. So if you're a rebel trying to get yourself to do something, or you're trying to help a rebel in your life to do something, you can remember that there's 2 things that really work. One is to remind that rebel of the rebel's identity. Rebels always want to express their authentic self. So remind the rebel, this is who you are. This is what you want. This is the kind of person you want to be, because then a rebel can choose to follow that kind of behavior. Also, something that works with rebels very well is information, consequences, choice. You give the rebel the information that they need to know what's going on. You give them the consequences of their actions, and then you allow them to choose without nagging, without oversight, without reminders, without supervision. Because when they know the consequences of their action, they can make a choice. However, you must allow any negative consequence to happen to that rebel. If you step in and rescue, if you fix things at the last minute, the rebel is not going to learn from that sequence. As painful as it can be sometimes, you have to let negative consequences fall. It's important to remember that the 4 Tendencies framework is meant to help us understand ourselves more deeply, not to limit our sense of identity or possibility. Some people argue that when you define yourself, you confine yourself. But the 4 Tendencies framework isn't meant to be a label that determines everything about you, but rather a spotlight that can illuminate hidden aspects of your nature. If you'd like to go deeper into the 4 Tendencies, in addition to reading the book, The 4 Tendencies, you can join my free app, the Better app. There you can join discussions, swap insights, post questions, and this is especially key for you obligers, join accountability groups right there in the app. Knowing our own tendency can allow us to show ourselves more compassion by realizing, hey, I'm this type of person, there's nothing wrong with me, there are a lot of people just like me, and I can figure out ways to make the best of it. And knowing other people's tendencies can help us to have more compassion for them, to understand them better, and how they see the world differently, and also how we can engage with them more effectively. What works for me as an upholder very likely will not work with you, a rebel. People sometimes ask, well, which tendency is the happiest tendency? Or which tendency tends to be the most successful tendency? But it's not a matter of being a member of a particular tendency. Each of the tendencies includes people who are big, big successes and also big, big losers. The happiest, healthiest, most productive, and most creative people are those who have figured out how to harness the strengths of their tendency and also how to offset the limitations and the weaknesses of their tendencies. One of the biggest challenges of daily life is, how do I get people, including myself, to do what I want? The 4 Tendencies makes this task much, much easier, because the 4 Tendencies explain why we act and why we don't act. And then it explains what to do with that information. When we understand the 4 Tendencies, we're much better able to manage ourselves and other people. Onward and upward. If you'd like a quiz to find out your tendency, or you'd like someone else to take the quiz, take the free quiz at happiercast.com/quiz.